The CDC director makes an executive decision on boosters. A paint so white it could reduce the need for air conditioning. And Love, Hate, 8 Fall Edition. Friday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Friday, September 24th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hi, Carlo.
Happy Freitag, Jill, and happy Freitag to everyone out there today. It is Friday, so we'll be on the YouTube live chat in a little bit, 9 a.m. Eastern time. If you want to join us, youtube.com/Cheddar now. Come say hello.
Always a good time. And if you're wondering why, if you're watching on YouTube and not listening, and you're wondering why, my makeup looks crazy today, it's because I did my makeup in the dark because something's going on with the lights in this office. And I don't have internet, so I'm literally reading from my phone the script that you just emailed me. So I'm not checking Instagram, everybody. I'm actually doing work.
Yeah, bear with us today, guys. We're having some technical problems, but we'll get through it.
All right, here we go. The director of the CDC has overruled her own advisors to endorse booster shots for people whose jobs put them at risk of contracting COVID. This is a surprise overnight decision from Dr. Rochelle Walensky, and it came after the CDC's advisory panel gave the green light to Pfizer boosters for those 65 and up, as well as younger adults with underlying conditions. But it notably did not extend that to otherwise healthy frontline workers like teachers or nurses. Walensky's move puts the CDC in line with the FDA's recommendation, and it means that the White House can start promoting a booster campaign as early as today.
This was surprising, as you said, shocking, frankly. I went to bed last night surprised that the CDC advisory panel didn't include those frontline workers, as the FDA's panel did, but they did include anyone who was at high risk medically, right? Meaning that you could be a hospital worker who got vaccinated like 8 or 9 months ago now, and not be eligible for a booster, while a 20-year-old college student who was a smoker would be, which is that just didn't really seem right to me, I think. So I was pleasantly surprised here to see Walensky kind of take a stand on this, and it does mean, as you said, that the booster campaign now it's a couple days late, but it's going to start. So if you're in those groups, you should be able to get a booster of the Pfizer vaccine. If you got the Pfizer vaccine originally and it was more than 6 months from your last shot, you should be able to go into a pharmacy as of today to start to get that. Jill, I just wanted to mention one thing from something we were talking about earlier this week. We were talking about that Tennessee hospital that was saving those monoclonal antibody treatments for unvaccinated patients. One of our listeners, Les, put me onto this. I wasn't aware, so I just wanted to make it clear. The Biden administration actually cut the supply of monoclonal antibodies to a lot of what they called high-use states, basically states with a lot of unvaccinated people in the hospital. They had cut it to 70% of what it was just a few weeks earlier. So the administration basically forced, I think, the hand of some of these states to start rationing that treatment, which you could argue is unethical, right? The administration would argue that there's just a limited supply of this medicine, and there's a lot of folks in some of these states, I think, that are going unvaccinated under the assumption that if they get really sick, this treatment will be available to them. So anyway, this whole thing is very ethically fraught, but I just wanted to add a little bit of context to that that we talked about yesterday or the day before.
I think that was important. The booster debate is fascinating. I think that it makes a lot of sense given the fact, early on the rules were so arbitrary in terms of who could get the vaccine. I don't know, thinking back to this late December, January of 2020. And I remember there just being so much confusion, and like grandparents in Florida were getting vaccinated before, grandparents in New York, right? Just because the rules were totally different. And it sort of felt like this is where this was going right now with the booster shots. It was sort of that same kind of, well, why does this person deserve a booster and not that? And I think that it made sense to sort of ration or limit or have maybe rules when there was not enough supply. But at this point, there's really plenty of supply. So it feels like if somebody feels like they need a booster shot, they should probably be able to get one.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, speaking of Tennessee, as you were mentioning, a grocery store in suburban Memphis was the scene of the country's latest mass shooting. A gunman walked into a Kroger in the town of Collierville yesterday and immediately opened fire, killing one woman and injuring at least 12 others. The victims' identities have not been released. Police say the gunman, who has also not been identified, was found dead in the back of the store of an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Here we go again. I mean, I don't really know.
I mean,
what
it could
to
have been
say.
worse. Could have been worse, I guess, right? A bystander told reporters that police arrived within minutes and they swarmed that supermarket, which of course is the protocol. So, good. I'm glad that happened, that the police were so responsive. But the problem, of course, as we've talked about so many times, Jill, is that when you have a high-powered rifle, and I don't know that this guy did, but often in these situations, they're carrying one of these AR-15-like weapons. All you need is seconds to inflict serious damage and serious casualties. So even if the police are there in a minute, you can still kill a lot of people. I think the only reason this wasn't worse seems to be that the people inside that Kroger knew what to do. They hid in freezers. Some of them ran out of the back. At least one person ran onto the roof. So they tell you run, hide, fight in these situations, and it appears that that's what these folks did.
All right, on to politics. Carlo, the House last night easily passed a bill to provide $1 billion in funding for Israel's Iron Dome aerial defense system after it was removed from a separate piece of legislation meant to prevent a government shutdown. It was a group of progressive Democrats that had threatened to sink the bill unless the Iron Dome funds were taken out. The final vote was 420-9, with 2 voting present, including AOC. 8 Democrats and 1 Republican voted against it.
That one Republican, if you're wondering, was this guy, Congressman Massey. I forget where he's from, but he's like one of those sort of like hardline libertarians. He votes against anything, any foreign aid to any country, so it wasn't specific to Israel. This bill will now go to the Senate, where it will pass. Biden will sign it into law. But yes, certainly some political drama over this yesterday. As you mentioned, AOC, she actually voted no, and then she changed her vote to present. Appeared to be crying if you actually watch the C-SPAN feed of this. I'm not really sure what that was all about. I don't really understand, frankly, the purpose of letting lawmakers vote present on anything. It seems like you either vote yes or you vote no. The voting present doesn't really. I don't know what it solves.
I read a lot of the accounts that AOC was crying and hugging some of her colleagues. I'm a little confused as to what's going on. I could venture a guess, but I shall not do it on this podcast. I just wanted to, for some context, read a couple of tweets, because it is confusing if you're wondering, why this is included in whatever. And I think none of our budget bills make a ton of sense, and there's so much in them that really isn't quote unquote like but running government. Representative Elisa Slotnick, she tweeted, and she's a former intelligence worker. I just wanted to, I thought her explanation was pretty good. She said, I understand that some House Democrats object to funding for the Iron Dome in Israel. Just to level set a few facts. Iron Dome is a purely defensive system. It protects civilians when hundreds of rockets are shot at population centers. Whatever your views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, using a system that just saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives as a political chit is problematic. Iron Dome, like other missile defense systems, was co-developed by the U.S. and Israel. The research that went into the design of this system is shared between our 2 countries and can be used to protect our bases abroad, in addition to Israeli civilians in their homes. Continued financial support of Iron Dome was part of the 2016 Memorandum of Understanding negotiated by President Obama. This is not new funding or unusual funding or a precipitous increase in funding. All of this is publicly available information. So to target Iron Dome now means the issue is not a genuine concern over the system, but rather the desire to attack anything related to the state of Israel. It is devoid of substance and irresponsible. And also from Congressman Richie Torres, who is a progressive from New York. I read
that story you said. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
A missile defense system, i.e. Iron Dome, defends civilians from missiles, hence the name. Only in a morally inverted universe would this be considered a controversy. And I will leave it there.
Torres is an interesting congressman. I read that piece that you sent me the other day from Brett Stevens in the Times about how he's sort of like the actual progressive face of politics in the House, not AOC. So anyway, well, I think both of them probably have, their sights on higher office, right?
I saw him on Bill Maher a few months back, and I was so impressed. It was the first time I'd ever heard of him. I was extremely impressed by him. And I think certainly someone to watch.
Yeah.
Overseas now, Germans go to the polls on Sunday to elect a new government and chancellor, bringing to an end the 16-year rule of Angela Merkel. The race is close. Merkel's center-right Christian Democrats are trailing the center-left Social Democrats by a couple points. Whatever happens, Merkel's long and much admired tenure as the president of Europe will be over.
Of course, not the real president of Europe, but that is what they call her, and they also call her mommy, which I've always thought was sort of funny, because she is sort of like the mother of sort of like liberal democracy in Europe. I've always been a big Angela Merkel fan. She's sort of like she's always been this kind of steady hand at the till over the course of a lot of crises, from the financial crisis to the refugee crisis to COVID. Not to say that she was perfect by any stretch. Germany probably way too slow to confront climate change. They have their own income inequality problems in that country. But just as an outside spectator without any, skin in the game here, I always just kind of liked her deliberate kind of like no nonsense approach. Sort of the kind of politician that would never, really be elected here because she's kind of boring. Right. She's not particularly charismatic. But I always kind of like that about her. But 16 years, a long time for any politician to be in power, of course.
Sticking with Europe, this is potentially, I think, the biggest news story of the day. And I just want to get it out there. The EU has announced a plan to require consumer electronics companies to adopt a uniform charging method for smartphones and other mobile devices. The rules call for manufacturers to use USB-C ports and chargers for everything. Most already do, with one major exception, and we all know it. Apple, the iPhone maker, has come out against the common charger law, saying, what else? It stifles innovation. I almost cheered as I was listening to reports of this and actual sound bites from the Europeans who were proposing it, and I was so excited. And we know a lot of this stuff usually happens in Europe, some of the tougher regulations on tech companies, and then eventually makes its way here.
It would be nice if we had Europe's sort of like consumer protection ideals, wouldn't it? Like they actually do things to protect their people, their consumers. Apple's saying that this stifles innovation. Of course, that's complete BS, right? But yeah, to your point, because of how complex it would be to have to make different charging ports for devices that were sold in the EU versus being sold here, I think there's a pretty good chance here, if you read between the lines, that Apple is going to just give up and they're going to make the switch within the next 2 years, which is when this ruling would go into effect. And thank God. I mean, exactly. Like changing that port on the iPhone, whenever they did that 10 years ago or so, that was like a human rights violation, in my opinion. It's just it's like, why? Why? For what end?
The other point, which I thought was fascinating, is the waste and the climate change angle of it, the environmental angle of it, because you have all these companies. This is where you have to call BS on all of these companies who are like, we're going to go green, we're going to go carbon neutral. Yep. Here's an idea: don't make us buy a new charger every time we have to get a phone if you actually care about the environment.
Yes, completely agree, Jill.
Speaking of the environment, a team of researchers at Purdue University has created a paint so white that it reflects most solar radiation and could conceivably, one day, make air conditioning obsolete. The Guinness Book of Records just declared the paint the whitest ever made. The goal of the project was sustainability because the paint is so ultra-reflective that it absorbs less heat than it emits, meaning that a surface coated with this stuff actually cools its surrounding area without consuming energy. Cool.
This paint is so white. You got to go. How white is it, Carlo?
How white is it, Carlo?
This paint is so white that it just called the police on its neighbor. No? Nothing?
I'm more a little concerned right now at the lighting on my shot, actually, which just I'm a little concerned about what's going on in this office at the moment with the lights.
All right, sorry guys. But anyway, this is all joking aside. This is potentially a game changer here. This paint reflects more than 98% of solar radiation. Even the whitest paint on the market only reflects like 85%. So like you said, this keeps whatever it's coating, cooler than the surrounding temperature. So if that actually works, Think about that. I mean, you could literally paint your house with this stuff. You could not need air conditioning, and just imagine what that would do for the environment. And even if you're wondering about the actual color itself, interior designers who spoke to Architectural Digest say that the shade is, quote, chic with a modern vibe.
I think that this is the type of stuff that's so incredibly important, and it's like a low cost, easy to implement, at least in theory, right? For all I know, it's
right.
Super expensive, but it seems like a relatively easy fix, or one tool in the arsenal that's so
exactly.
I can't imagine it being controversial. To any large extent. Okay, so we had an idea to try this other fun segment. Not really a fun segment, but sometimes Carlo and I, when we are debating what stories to throw into the podcast, we can't possibly include everything just because we don't have enough time. And I also, when we came up with the idea for Need2Know, the idea was to just make it a one-stop shop, where if it's the only newsletter that you read during the day, you have enough information, you know what's going on. And likewise, if this is the only podcast that you listen to during the day, at least you would have enough, you'd have a pretty good sense of all the stories that are out there. So we wanted to just do this quick little segment at the end of the podcast where we quickly just shoot through one by one a couple of other headlines. So let's try it out and let us know what you think. So
right.
I think you want to call it Around the Horn? I think we can work on that name.
Around the Horn. Okay, fair enough. But let's start here in Arizona. A GOP audit of the Arizona election vote tally in Maricopa County just ended, and they found that the results closely matched President Biden's margin of victory in that state. Biden actually did better in that county in the recount. So this basically just puts to bed a central part of the conspiracy theory that the 2020 election was stolen.
The Taliban says that it will resume executions and amputations of hands for various transgressions of Sharia law, saying that they're necessary for security, though the group says it won't do them in public venues like stadiums anymore.
Oh, that's very nice of them. The U.S. envoy to Haiti resigned this week in response to what he called the, quote, inhumane treatment of Haitian migrants at the border. This is DHS has suspended horse patrols in that Texas town of Del Rio after that outcry. The
Chinese property developer Evergrande missed a big interest payment that came due yesterday, leading to concerns that it's on the precipice of default. Beijing reportedly making preps for the company to fail, which could spook global markets.
And McDonald's saying this week that it will start to phase out plastic toys in its Happy Meals. Talk about sustainability. The goal, of course, to be plastic-free at McDonald's by 2025.
And Boppy, the maker of the popular infant pillows and a brand you are familiar with if you are a new parent, now recalling 3.3 million of their newborn loungers after the product was linked to 8 infant deaths. Those babies suffocated while being left in the loungers. The Boppy says they were never intended as sleep products and do require supervision. This one hit me because this is like the hottest new product, and I remember when I was pregnant, everyone's like, you have to get a Boppy, make sure you register for it. And I'm sure you have one floating around somewhere.
I have like a Boppy knockoff, but yeah, the recalls, we could talk for hours about the recalls, Jill. It's like something you got to keep an eye on now with all of these infant things that we have, right?
All right, really quick, Love, Hate, 8.
Okay, one thing that we love, the first chill in the air after a long, hot, and muggy summer, and we're going to get that here in New York, looks like later today.
One thing that we hate, just thinking about the leaves that we're going to be raking soon.
The most Sisyphean task, of course, there is. And one thing that we ate, Jill, the iced apple crisp macchiato at Starbucks. This thing is basically candy for adults. I'm telling you, if you can find one of these things, it's the new pumpkin spice latte, and you heard it here first. Iced apple crisp macchiato. All
right, everybody, thank you for bearing with us today. A lot of tech issues. That is what you need to know for Friday, September 24th.
Have a great weekend, guys.